In 1977, Star Wars came into existence and was a massive cultural phenomenon. George Lucas, the creator of the film, had brought it to life out of a fascination with the two biggest things that come with all good science fiction: technology and socio-political situations. The film had come into being shortly after the end of the Vietnam War, and Lucas was partially inspired by the plight of the Vietnamese when constructing this band of backwater rebels who dare to take on an empire all by themselves. But like many of the creations which Lucas helped bring to life, Star Wars also ends up existing as a reflection of content which Lucas absorbed as a child. Lucas had grown up hearing stories of G.I. Joe and G.I. Jane fighting the Nazis one-on-one and stopping them from taking over the world. And so, that messaging is what the films often reflect. The Vietnam conflict, which we had mentioned before, had left America embarrassed and emotionally crippled. It was brought into existence by capitalist interests in the country, who were afraid that a communist Vietnam would hurt trade deals, and any narrative sold about the conflict outside of that was a lie. America used chemical warfare to cripple the citizens of the nation, killed 60,000 of its own troops and 3 million of the Vietnamese, and all for the sake of stopping the citizens of this nation from using their democracy to hurt some investment banker's wallet. People were not generally proud about any of this, and Star Wars proved to be a good escape from that. If one believes that the rebellion are stand-ins for the Allied powers, as most audience members did, then the films act as a wistful look back at a time where war, and the involvement in war, was something America was proud of. Where the bad guys were unambiguously evil, and thus we were the good guys, no matter what. War exists within the original 3 films because the alternative to war is total subjugation. Because fighting the good fight is essential to guaranteeing freedom to any and all people. But this isn't a video about the original trilogy. It's about a film series which was made decades later, known to fans as the Prequels. For the longest time, the prequels were known exclusively for being the inferior Star Wars product. Terrible to the extent of being nearly unwatchable. I remember a time when The Force Awakens was about to come out, and the biggest question in the air was if making a good Star Wars film in the 21st century was even possible, because people hated the films that much.
Better than the prequels, right? It's gonna be better than the prequels.
Oh yeah, fuck yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to defend the quality of the prequels, per se. I think it's pretty undeniable that they have issues that one should not avoid or overlook. The biggest to me is that there's this very awkward mix of what the films want to be. The plot is essentially about a fascist dictatorship slowly coming to power and then committing a genocide. And while half of the films are dedicated to treating that very seriously, the other half compensate a little too heavily under the goal of helping the brand sell Happy Meal toys. The prequels are by far the worst trilogy just in terms of basic filmmaking and upfront watchability, but to me they also happen to be the most interesting in terms of what they represent and what they have to say. Because Lucas invented the films to be willing to represent not only the issues of the past, but of the present. And this shows itself most clearly in how the trilogy chooses to represent war. War in the prequels exists not out of a necessity to do what's right or to fight an evil force, but instead it is propagated by corrupt figures who want to feed into a more simplistic narrative to cover up the truth. War exists because specific men understand that they can use overblown conflicts to consolidate power, and all of the forces involved who believe that they are fighting for something important are just pawns in someone else's unseen game. So yeah, this is going to be a video essay basically talking about interesting ideological points which can be drawn from prequel media, and how said media essentially exists as a reflection of Lucas's views of politics, and specifically those leading up to and including the start to the Bush administration. In my opinion, this is one of the sole factors that makes these films interesting to talk about, despite how bad they are. As a quick aside, I do want to give a big thanks to the sponsor of today's video, NordVPN. Just in time for the holidays, if you use my link at nordvpn.com/Quinton or use my coupon code Quinton, you'll save 81% on your purchase. Plus, you'll get an extra 4 months and a full year of the new Nord Pass entirely for free. That's such a great deal that the service is almost paying for itself. So be sure, once again, to go to nordvpn.com/QUINTON or use the code QUINTON at checkout to save 81%. With that, let's begin. Part 1, Everything You Know is a Lie. Episodes 1 and 2 set up new status quos which continue through the prequel films. In Episode 1, we see the Trade Federation circling around Naboo, attempting to blockade their trade routes. It's understood that while doing this is technically legal, it's bordering on very illegal. But it's worth the potential cost because the conflict could potentially lead to higher proceeds for the capitalist military group. The Supreme Chancellor Valorum sends 2 Jedi to act as ambassadors. At which point, an evil figure known as Darth Sidious instructs the Trade Federation to kill the Jedi and invade Naboo, believing that if they can force the teenage queen to sign a treaty, they can justify the event to the Galactic Senate. With the help of the Jedi and a character named Jar Jar Binks, they manage to get the queen off the planet. One pit stop to Tatooine and one rescued slave boy later, and we find ourselves at the Galactic Senate, where things aren't as pristine as the original trilogy would have had you believe. An obsession with order and bureaucracy coupled with massive corruption means that no one is willing to help Naboo fast enough to save the Queen's people. In short, not only will the Trade Federation have something to gain from Naboo's current government being overthrown, but many other senators will also see their income increase because of it. You see the aliens from E.T. there? All of those guys are in the back pocket of the Federation. Corrupt little fuck. Palpatine instructs the Queen that if she is stalled, her only option is to call for a re-election of the Senate's Chancellor. And when she does, it quickly transpires that Palpatine will almost certainly be the next Chancellor. The Jedi go back to the planet, they outsmart the Trade Federation, good guys win. By the events of Episode 2, which Lucas had given the working title of Jar Jar's Great Adventure, the Republic has been split by many forces wanting to leave the Union due to personal fears and demands that they have. The film doesn't do a good job of expanding more details than this, but we're basically told, Separatists bad, Republic good. When Obi-Wan investigates an attempted assassination on the Queen-turned-Senator, he discovers a clone army that has been created to be used by the Jedi to protect the Republic. And just in time, as the Separatist movement has prepared a massive droid army and is planning to use it to wipe the Jedi out and force their will upon the Republic. Thus marks the start of what will be known as the Clone Wars, which will span 3 in-universe years, 2 additional movies, and well over 40 hours of television. The most important thing one has to realize about this conflict is that it isn't all that it's perceived to be. At the surface level, the conflict is all about the Jedi, the Republic, and their glorious leader, Chancellor Palpatine, fighting the good fight and trying to defeat their enemies, the manipulated Separatists, the Sith fighting with them, and the evil Darth Sidious. But of course, the most important factor of this setup is that Chancellor Palpatine and Darth Sidious have really similar chins. Do you guys remember Gary's Game? That Pixar short about the old man playing chess with himself. That's what the prequels are. It's that short film all the time. This man, who will soon be known as just the Emperor, has invented both his public charade as a peacekeeping leader wanting to protect the galaxy, as well as this shrouded evil persona who works behind the scenes to recruit forces to fight and disrupt the very body he protects.
I'm gonna play both sides. Why would you tell me that?
Why he does all of this is unclear within the first film, outside of the implication that he actually does somehow come to benefit from the Trade Federation gaining more power, which as a representative of Naboo, I guess he might, but things start to make a little bit more sense in Episode 2, where we see that Palpatine is still a Chancellor years later, even as war looms on the horizon. As the conflict with the Separatist movement goes far enough that their droid army is prepared to attack the Republic, Palpatine and his close associate slyly note that if someone was brave enough to argue for him to gain emergency powers, maybe he could use that clone army someone mysteriously made for them without them asking. Jar Jar's eyes light up, and he gives an inspiring speech to the masses, which brings the Republic together in celebration of the greatness of Palpatine. This is a good thing. Definitely. Thank you, Jar Jar Binks. Then a bunch of stuff happens. Filler, 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 filler. Yoda lightsaber battle that's embarrassing. Filler, filler. Final sequence. Count Dooku, having created the separatist movement by inspiring fear within the founding nations of evil lurking within the Republic, is seen leaving the planet where the conflict began and arriving on Coruscant to meet his master, Darth Sidious. The Clone Wars has begun, he says, just as they have planned. The final scene shows an army of clones preparing for battle as ships float into the distance, all under the glare of Chancellor Palpatine, alongside those who believe him to be their ally. If you were a kid at the time, you maybe saw this as the start to a new and exciting video game. But if you were an adult, you recognize the troops as the predecessors to the Empire's stormtroopers, the spaceships as the very thing used by the Empire to hunt down and destroy all rebel forces, and you know that background music as the Imperial March playing for the first time. In every way except for literal naming, this is the first scene in the chronological saga where the Empire exists, where the Emperor has total control, and where he can use his ultimate power to enforce his will on the galaxy. Now that we've finished the second film, let's transition to the small screen, television. At the start of every episode of the 3D Clone Wars show, an overexcited narrator tries to explain to the audience what is happening and why they should care. This is presented as an emulation of old World War II news broadcasts. Because of this, it doesn't really exist as a real reflection of the conflict, but as a piece of propaganda representing the very narrative that Sidious and Dooku are trying to sell to the main characters.
The Republic's clone army strives for victory against the evil forces of the Separatists. Bravery, valor, unity.
Sure. Doesn't that voice make you expect this to turn out to be a Happy Meals toy commercial? Of course, if you've seen enough of the show, you know that that voice also belongs to this guy, whose name is Yularen. Yularen is based off of one of the guys in Vader's evil circle of old white dudes in Episode 4. So this opening voiceover is one of the many examples in prequel media of an unreliable narrator shaping our perspective of the war effort. Let's playfully look at the war from the Separatist point of view. In Attack of the Clones, there's an important scene where Dooku tells Obi-Wan that a dark Sith Lord now controls the Republic government, something he claims has been proven by other people in the movement. Obi-Wan doesn't believe him. Some fans remember the scene and use it to justify a theory that Dooku is actually the secret good guy of the prequels, but that none of the other characters realize it. But that's not the subtext in the slightest. Because Dooku only tells Obi-Wan this because he believes it will sway him to the dark side, and he is later seen as Darth Sidious' secret apprentice. What we're supposed to believe is that Dooku has been feeding the Separatists with the claim that the Republic has fallen to the Sith in order to escalate them into war. Another element we see in the Clone Wars 3D show is that many Separatists also come to the conclusion that the Galactic Senate is corrupt, that most senators have financial backing that makes their motivations impure, and because of this, many systems feel that remaining in the Republic just isn't safe anymore. This is also something we're told in Episode 1, although by Palpatine, so once again, unreliable narrator. And it's something we're shown to be the case throughout the same episodes where these arguments are brought up. Of course, one might take to the comments to say that none of that should matter, because while the Separatists have good motivations, they're being manipulated by an evil Sith Lord and money-grubbing capitalists, and thus, they're all bad. And yeah, I happen to agree. Part 2. The Jedi are bad, and that's the point. Note to editor, in this segment you should occasionally show clips from Forces of Destiny just to fuck with people. Let's go back just a moment to the start of the original 1977 trilogy and the world we're expected to buy into. The Empire has ultimate power over the galaxy and abuse that power to enforce the will of the Emperor. The Rebellion, a dwindling group of fighters from across the galaxy, most bound by an obsession with the Last Jedi faith of the Force, organized in an attempt to fight the good fight, trying their best along the way to convince systems to leave the Empire and join their cause. Now let's read the opening crawl of Attack of the Clones. Several thousand solar systems have announced their intentions to leave the Republic, aka what's going to be the Empire in like 3 years. The Separatist movement, under the leadership of the mysterious Count Dooku, has made it difficult for the limited number of Jedi Knights to maintain peace and order in the galaxy. What? It's really weird to look at this storyline of someone trying to make a rebellion while the Republic is still presumed to be good, and the Jedi dedicating their lives to shutting down even the idea of someone trying to leave the Union. This is especially true knowing the wider context of the Star Wars universe, which is obviously how we're supposed to look at these 3 films. The main problem with the Empire in the original trilogy is that their power is overblown and sweeps across the galaxy, and the context of this story is that the Jedi are fighting for the pseudo-Empire in order to keep this massive power, because it makes it easier for them to enforce peace.
And when I got to them, we went into aggressive negotiations. Thank you.
Aggressive negotiations, what's that?
Well, negotiations with a lightsaber.
What doesn't help in defending the Jedi's role in this conflict is that in this first scene of Episode 2, the Jedi are meeting with Chancellor Palpatine, the evil Sith Lord bad guy of basically all of the Star Wars films. Starting with the opening of Episode 1 and continuing up to the activation of Order 66, the Jedi are shown to be working for the Emperor, doing his bidding and accomplishing tasks that he asked for without even the slightest questioning. Truly, the only difference that ends up mattering between the Sith working for Palpatine to accomplish his goals and the Jedi working for Palpatine to accomplish his goals is that the Sith at least understand that they're doing evil, and the Jedi are just stupid people. And you can say that they're just trying to keep the peace and work to end the war without disrupting the balance of politics with the Chancellor, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the Star Wars films, more than anything else, are about anti-imperialism, and the Jedi act in the prequels as accessories to imperialism. In Season 3, Episode 10 of the 3D Clone Wars show, Ahsoka Tano, Anakin's Padawan, makes a concerted effort to try and understand the politics of the war which she has been drafted into. Anakin explains this as simply as he can.
The Separatists believe the Republic is corrupt, but they're wrong, and we have to restore order.
Within the narrative of the episode, this stands out as the take that is the most wrong. We'll get back to this in part 3, but I think learning that this is wrong, and that the politics of this war are very complex, and that she might not be fully fighting for ultimate good, grows a seed of doubt in Ahsoka that will follow her as a character for seasons to come. I really love Ahsoka. She's probably one of my favorite characters in the franchise. I hope we get to see her in live action one day. It should quickly be pointed out that the plot of the prequels didn't need to be this complex. In the original trilogy, all we know about the events before the original Star Wars is that the Jedi existed, there was a war that we know had clones in it, Anakin became Darth Vader and joined the Emperor, the Empire was formed, and the Jedi were hunted down. It seems like it would have been a little more straightforward for there to have been a war between the good guys, the Republic, the Jedi, and the bad guys, the future Empire, and Palpatine. And for the bad guys to have just simply overtaken the good guys in the end. But the main point about the prequels is that this ridiculous moral complexity is implicit in all modern conflicts, and that most of the horrible events in the series are caused by the hubris of the Jedi, leading them to be blind to the obvious events transpiring in front of their eyes. And furthermore, that the ideology of the Jedi is a flawed one. The Jedi's core belief in the prequel trilogy is that intense emotions are the path to the dark side. The motivation to want creates a desire which clouds judgment, and thus it's said that Jedi Knights live as monks, denying themselves possessions, love lives, and even friendship to some extent. Yoda specifically serves as the film's mouthpiece in delivering the belief that emotions are dangerous, and pretty much always lead to evil stuff eventually happening. I can tell this kid has fear. Fear is always bad. You're never allowed to be afraid. When Anakin comes to Yoda trying to ask about his fears of Padme dying without directly stating what the situation is, Yoda basically tells him that the problem is that he cares, and that he just shouldn't care, because not caring is the path to the well-lit side of the Force. Turn it off. Like a light switch, just go click. It's a cool little Jedi trick. Okay, I'll promise never to sing again. The failures of the Jedi in these films are really rooted in the fact that they choose to think this way. Because without our emotions, without our roots in the connection of all that is around us, we can't understand or process our world. And when I say connections to the things around us, I don't mean the little Smurf men that live in Anakin's blood. There's a scene in episode 2 that's pretty infamous that I feel people misinterpret, where Anakin starts talking about the fact that he doesn't like sand. People usually miss the fact that this is actually a setup for a scene later in the movie. When Anakin is at his mother's grave after her sudden death, he reaches down and picks up a big old handful of sand. And he gives that sand a good old feel, feels how rough and coarse it is, and then he doesn't let go. He holds the sand close because he's decided to accept the sand. You see, the sand is a metaphor for, grief, I think. I don't actually know. These movies suck. When the Jedi believe that emotions lead to the dark side of the Force, it only turns out to be true because the practice of denying emotions within their order. If Anakin had found some other path to help him with his struggles with his wife, or even just the ability to understand that his fears and emotions are valid, it's likely he wouldn't have felt the need to join the Sith. He was pushed away because turning off his emotions didn't turn out to be enough, and this is what led him to the dark side. Furthermore, I would argue that the Jedi mistaking their choice to not think emotionally as them being impartial is one of the biggest things that leads to their most disagreeable choices in the prequel saga. There's nothing in their mind that makes the power dynamic in these films objectively worth questioning, nor this war, which clearly has been set up for them, nor any of these other crazy things which indicate that they might be fighting for the bad guys. So they just don't look into it. But more importantly, they never choose to fight for good unless a conflict is already at hand. If the status quo isn't going to personally harm them, they see no qualms in letting it exist. They want to do good at a leisurely pace, while the dark side of the Force doesn't share that same tempo. That's why they never go to Tatooine and free all the slaves. And why, while in the original trilogy, one of the main cast's greatest accomplishments is defeating the Hutts, in prequel media, the Jedi do jobs for the Hutts, like chaperoning Baby Jabba, the remarkably inferior prequel version of Baby Yoda. But this story element is very much a purposeful thing in these films, because it's this very element of the Jedi that Luke overcomes in the original trilogy. In those films, Yoda tells Luke, like he told Anakin, that his choice to care about things would be his ultimate failing, and that he needed to continue his training and lose investment in the lives of his friends, even if it meant them dying. But Luke rejects the claims of his old masters, that emotions and connections only lead to the dark side of the Force, and in doing so, he manages to redeem Anakin Skywalker, who dies in his arms not as a ruthless killer, but as his father, his inexplicably British father.
Go, my son.
My headcanon is that as soon as Anakin finds out that the voice he's speaking with doesn't actually come out of the mask, he starts doing that accent just knowing that no one can hear it, and after like 20 years, he's forgotten that he's still doing it. But Luke's journey being a response to the Jedi of the prequels doesn't take away from the fact that there is now a contradiction, not in the content of the films, but how they're understood by the fandom. First, we have a set of films starring characters who believe that this lost organization was the duct tape holding the galaxy together. And then we have these films set beforehand, saying that said organization was actually one of the main forces that helped everything get really, really bad. Idealization of this flawed group and this flawed republic is arguably one of the things that leads to the failure of the New Republic and the rise of the First Order. And it's probably hard for some fans to understand all of this because they probably didn't stop to think about how bad the Jedi are in the first 3 films, because no one really spells it out in the text. And this is where everyone's favorite Star Wars movie comes in, The Last Jedi. The reason I still love The Last Jedi is that it serves as a meta-commentary about the franchise coming to terms with how it's evolved as it's expanded. In the film, Luke has gone on the same journey as we have as an audience. In the original trilogy, which he experienced first, He lived for the sole purpose of being a hero and trying to preserve and resurrect the Lost Jedi Order, which he viewed as the missing balance to peace in the universe. But as he learned more about what had really happened in the decades leading up to his birth, he realized that the Jedi as an organization had not been a great presence, and that they had had an active role in helping evil take power through their misguided actions and their obsession with their own worth leading to their downfall. Beginning to doubt his own role as a hero worshipped by the masses, and seeing the same mistakes of the old Jedi in his actions, he chooses to go into hiding and to allow the beliefs he had been born to protect to fade with him. Perhaps one of the most ideologically important scenes in the entire Star Wars saga is the moment where Luke and Rey have a debate about who the Jedi are. Luke states the flawed nature of the Jedi being a negative force before his birth, bringing up their help in the rise of Darth Sidious specifically, and Rey cites Luke himself being the direct opposite of those issues, and that none of those past mistakes matter, because his personal accomplishments are just as much what the Jedi are about than anything else. And the ultimate conclusion that the film comes to is that Rey is totally right, and that Luke was a good person, and he was a Jedi, despite doing with his powers what those before him really didn't. There's a line in the movie where Yoda says a quote that translates to something like, "There was nothing in there that Rey doesn't already have." A lot of angry fans have interpreted this to mean, oh, so Rey is a Mary Sue because she doesn't need training to be good at using her Force powers when every person before her did. Which, no, that's not the purpose of the line. First of all, Rey is terrible at using the Force. Like Anakin, she is gifted with incredible power, but she has no understanding of how to channel it right, causing her to make massive mistakes. Second of all, Yoda's point is that the Jedi shouldn't be defined by any of the tangential content of the Order in prequel media, nor the vast amount of legal code that the characters are constantly trying to live by in their actions. Rey doesn't need to become emotionally secluded. She doesn't need to not care about the safety of her friends. She can learn to find a balance with her powers without obsessing over past masters, or indeed any deep lore. It's a cathartic call for the Jedi to once again be defined by heroic figures like Luke fighting for good in the universe and saving his friends while taking a stand against evil forces, and using their emotional connections to save those from the dark side of the Force. It's an admittance that the prequels have a relevant role in the saga, but that the Jedi, like the individual characters, should be able to recognize their failures and become better. And that they are defined by the actions of knights, not by the historical nature of the Order. Jesus Christ, what am I doing? I'm praising the sequels in a video marketed towards praising the prequels. The comments are gonna be so shit!
Surprisingly, yes.
Part 3. Unlimited rice pudding, etc., etc. Throughout this video, I've been alluding to clear corruption in the Senate, which inspires much of the war effort, but I haven't stopped and laid out what said corruption was. And I think it's pretty important that we do that, because even with all the information I've shown so far, these nuggets totally reshape the context of the war. Season 3, Episode 10 of The Clone Wars is titled Heroes on Both Sides, but it's also clearly a representation of the opposite, of villains also being on both sides. In the story, we learn that the Republic is beyond bankrupt, and that their funding of the war effort has left them in this state, with more resources and new clones needed to keep the conflict going. The solution suggested by many senators is simple. By deregulating the banks, they can ask for a large loan, and use that to continue funneling into the war. Padme protests this, saying that the war has gone on long enough and that they need to consider negotiations. This angers the other senators, who view the Separatists as ultimate evil and thus only worthy of defeat on the battlefield. Despite this, Padme has done enough to push the vote back, so the senators can later vote with a clear mind. Following this, we see two important scenes behind closed doors. In one, Padme discusses with Ahsoka how the war ending with peace is a possibility, and how she still has friends who were once Republic senators and now are on the other side. Ahsoka asks why they can't meet with these people to discuss the war, and Padme explains that the Republic has made doing so illegal, believing that negotiating with the Separatists only would validate their cause. Behind another closed door, we see numerous banking and trade forces discussing the failed vote, as they note that deregulating the banks and continuing the war effort would make each of them trillions. The truth as clearly spelled out as it could be, is that these people propagate the war because it makes each of them a massive profit. And any chance of peace is a personal threat to their bank accounts.
We need fighting to feed the machine and our profits.
Gentlemen, the banking clan and trade federation are about business.
Padme and Ahsoka use the latter's nature as a Jedi as an excuse to sneak across enemy lines and meet with one separatist representative. The group truly share most beliefs, but the one contradiction between them is that Padme's friend-turned-separatist is ideologically infatuated with her own cause, and the version of Count Dooku that he wants her to see. And Padme believes in the good of the Republic, and indirectly, Chancellor Palpatine. The important thing to remember is that both of these people are wrong. But despite this, Padme's efforts are a success. She convinces her friend to call for peace and an end to the war within the Separatist Congress, which garners just enough support to barely pass a motion.
This is a democracy, and unlike the Republic, corporations do not rule us.
But people in both sides, who have really been in cahoots throughout the entire conflict, begin meeting discreetly to discuss how to end Padme's peace efforts. The solution which is engineered is that if the planet of Coruscant were to be attacked, essentially in a terrorist plot, the anger and fear within the representatives would be enough to push them to do whatever the Sith or the capitalist wanted. And that's exactly what happens. Nuance is once again squashed by evil interests, and the war goes on. This episode is the most important to the show for me, because it sets back into stone the element of the Clone Wars that other episodes have been trying to lightly ignore. That everyone in the conflict, from the identical yet individualized clones, to Obi-Wan, to even the children being brought up by the Jedi for the conflict, they are all nothing more than pawns being used to accomplish an endgame of evil. I want to talk about a really important interview with Lucas from the end of the Bush presidency, which I'm going to be directly reading quotes from. Basically, in the interview, the person jokes to George Lucas that Vice President Dick Cheney, now a cyborg thanks to an artificial heart, is a lot like Darth Vader. Lucas protested this, and the interviewer feared that they had gotten too political in their discussion. Lucas then politely explained, George Bush is Darth Vader. Cheney is the Emperor. Sometimes later, while on vacation, Lucas left a message explaining what he meant.
You know, Darth Vader is really a kid from the desert planet near Crawford, and the true evil of the universe is the Emperor, who pulls all the strings.
Now, these quotes don't literally mean that he fully saw the Emperor as a metaphor for Cheney during production, but his feelings about the current sitting president and the vice president were so strong that he felt no qualm with comparing Cheney to one of the most cartoonishly evil and corrupt figures ever made for the medium of film. Even if it wasn't on purpose, this had to have had some influence on how he tended to write characters like Palpatine in the prequels. Let's stop for a moment, just a bit of a fun example of a way that you can compare Cheney to the Emperor. A few years ago, a movie came out called Vice, which essentially illustrates Cheney's rise to power. In its most famous scene, W meets with Cheney at the start of his campaign and tells him over chicken wings that he wants him as his VP, his vice. Cheney responds that he's a corporate CEO. He's had upper jobs in Washington, D.C. for decades, and those have given him massive influence over the country, and basically that being vice president would give him no real authority. His suggested solution?
Maybe I can handle some of the more mundane jobs, overseeing bureaucracy, managing military, energy, foreign policy.
That sounds good.
This is a scene we see a couple times with Palpatine in the prequels. He suggests an issue to the characters who are either weak-willed or in a dire place, and he states that the only course of action is a path where he might just end up with a little more power. With this in mind, perhaps we really shouldn't say that Anakin is George W. Bush, but instead that Jar Jar Binks is George W. Bush.
Oh no!
Well, maybe not. His marketing strategy after leaving office has essentially been to play into the idea that he was some incompetent old man worthy of no blame, and comparing him to someone like Jar Jar Binks probably just helps him do that. It's also worth pointing out that Episode 2 was likely far into production before Bush had even been elected. The Emperor's actions in Episode 2 are more likely inspired by the actions of President Lyndon B. Johnson during the Vietnam conflict. Johnson had helped report and sensationalize a series of attacks which supposedly occurred in the Gulf of Tonkin between Vietnam and America, using this to scare the population and Congress into giving him executive power to do whatever he wanted in any fight to stop the concept of communism in Southeast Asia. This directly led to him putting troops down to fight the Viet Cong. The incidents in the Gulf of Tonkin turned out to essentially be a series of hoaxes. One story was entirely invented by the United States and the president, and the other rewritten to make the nation seem more innocent and not involved than they actually were. Lucas was very aware of the two-faced nature of politicians going back even that far, and what we can really draw from Episode 2 reminding us of Bush is that politicians selling a BS narrative to accomplish their own evil deeds is sort of a timeless concept. But Episode 3 is the exception to this, where the anti-Bush storytelling seems so overt that it's hard for me to believe that it isn't on purpose.
If you're not with me, then you're my enemy.
You are with us, or you are with the terrorists.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Episode 3 follows the end of the Clone Wars and the transition into the world we understand to exist in Episode 4. It's the most aesthetically fascinating film, in my opinion, as the change from one era to the next creates this odd clash that somehow also ends up working really well. As the main baddies of the war are killed off one by one, many characters begin to doubt that they have been led in the right direction, and that everyone on their side really is good. Throughout the story, we see that Palpatine has risen to a level of power unchallenged, with him serving in his seat long after his term has expired. As Anakin investigates on behalf of the Jedi Council, he quickly discovers the shocking revelation that Chancellor Palpatine and Darth Sidious are one and the same. When the Jedi confront Palpatine about this and state the desire to take him before the Senate, he responds, "I am the Senate." This line is hilariously weird and also a meme, but it reminds us of two really important facts. The first is that the people in the Republic love Palpatine, as do all the senators. He could never be removed from office or tried for his crimes, because those crimes have become foundational to the Republic's national ideology. And he builds this up not only through corruption, but also off of a branding that builds itself off of patriotism.
I love democracy. I love the Republic.
9/11 was bad.
The second thing it reminds us is that a key aspect of the Emperor's rise is that he gives himself a position of power above any other court of morality, which is politically important because these films had been preceded by Bush and Cheney's choice to rescind America's invitation to the International Criminal Court, a court of law in The Hague that tries generals and leaders for crimes against humanity. By taking back their involvement in this court, they essentially were stating that America should and would be allowed to commit war crimes at their own discretion if it meant they could ensure the concept of freedom. See also oil. The film ends with the Emperor declaring that the Republic is now the Empire, and that they would begin hunting all of the remaining Jedi across the galaxy, essentially declaring a war on Jedi. As the Senate rejoices, it's then that Natalie Portman delivers those immortal lines, "So this is how democracy dies, yada yada yada." I feel like this is a line that would be in the running for one of the greatest in the franchise, if not for the fact that it's directed so poorly that it once again has become a meme. It's a biting commentary on how evil powers come into play because they work to appeal to the overzealous pride of the people, and how they use their power to attempt to instill a society-wide hatred of whatever people they want to persecute that week. And thus, the prequels come to an end. The Jedi go into hiding, and the few left in the universe with any sanity are left waiting for a new hope to rise. Some final thoughts about this topic. At the start of this video, I alluded to the fact that people loved Star Wars because it made them feel nostalgic for past conflicts. I think one of the reasons people also hate the prequels so much is that it didn't do that. It made them feel bad about the existence and role of conflict in society. And that's not what people want out of Star Wars. They don't want a film that says that even groups who see themselves as protectors of peace can be forced into doing evil if they follow the lead of imperialism. and how celebrating the glory of war while fighting for the sake of vague national identity and being subservient to the existence of horrible political policies can inevitably lead to overt fascism. All that stuff is political! I just want my Star Wars movies to make me feel good. Make Star Wars that tells me that Star Wars is good and I'm good for liking it. As a final conclusion, the best Star Wars media is Rebels, because they use their lightsabers like helicopter blades. There is no topping that, that is where the franchise peaked. So let's say, theoretically, a massively powerful force in the galaxy has just called for the extermination of your entire ideological group. And now you're on the run with everywhere to go but nowhere to hide. Well, I mean, you got droids and you've got a spaceship. Someone could be tracking you. They could be in your computer. They could. This is a NordVPN sponsor. NordVPN is a service that helps you stay secure by cloaking your location to potential hackers and other online threats. With it, I can hop around the world and browse the internet any way I'd like. Look at me, I'm Canadian. I drink syrup straight from the bottle and watch reruns of the new Red Green show. Now I'm in the UK. Gonna drink some tea and watch me society burn to the ground. And now I'm in Finland. Turns out everything's okay in Finland too. Go to nordvpn.com/Quinton or use the code Quinton at checkout to get 81% off, with the additional presents of 4 months free on top of that and a full year of NordPass included. Once again, that's nordvpn.com/QUINTON. Hey everybody, welcome to the Patreon crawl for the video. Sweet baby. The camera's a little too high up, I'll fix that real quick. So I wanted to do like a little after the video, sort of discussion about a couple things with you guys for this crawl. One of the main reasons I want to do this is I started setting up this shelf to be all Christmassy, and I put Christmas hats on all the little figures, and then I realized, wait a minute, I gotta start packing this stuff like immediately, because the day I'm recording this is the 15th, and the 15th to the 20th are just going to be the 5-day span where I have 2 apartments. So basically today I need to start moving everything in my apartment to my new place. And it's going to be really stressful, on top of the fact that I'm trying really hard to get 2 Star Wars videos out this week, before the 19th. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to accomplish that, but if I do, it's entirely thanks to this video's guest editor. This video was edited by a guy named Chris. I met Chris a couple of years ago when he came to a fan meetup I did in New York, and we've kept in touch since then. He's a really great guy. You guys might also know him as Adustus. He did a Whose Line Is It Anyways video essay a couple months ago that kind of blew up. Really cool, that guy. Really excited to see what he does with this video. Cannot thank him enough. And I'm going to link his Twitter and his YouTube in the description. I just want you guys to go down there, give the man some love, because seriously, thank you so much. But I have one big call to action I want to give you guys for this video. I know you're not supposed to do too many, but I just want to talk about a little goal I had this year. Earlier this year, I was in this position where I was putting out these videos that I was pretty proud of, but they weren't performing that good. They rarely would surpass my own subscriber number, and because of that, I just wasn't gaining subscribers at a really good rate. And I said to myself, I'm actually okay with that, Like, I'm comfortable where I am as a creator. I love the people who, interact with me on Twitter. I don't know what I would do if it was even 10 times as big as it is. But I still want to feel like I'm growing just for personal validation. So I made this goal. I said to myself, by the end of 2019, I want to hit 330,000 subscribers. And we hit that a couple months ago. And it was such a big deal for me, But now that the decade is ending, I'm thinking to myself, I should make a little bit of a bigger goal for myself. So I've decided by the start of January 2021, I want to hit 400,000 subscribers. And I know 2021 is a ways away, but I've been growing so slow this year, I just feel like I need to start campaigning for it now for it to be realistic. So basically, right now, it's the last 20 seconds of the video. There should be a little button on your screen, my icon. Just click on the button, see if you're subscribed. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. Even if you don't use the feature, even if you find me through recommended, it means a whole lot. And that's it. That's all I'm asking for this video. With that, I've been Quinton Reviews, and that's all you need.